So let's talk about the effects that I am testing for when I do a factorial ANOVA. Right? So there's a couple of different effects. First of all, I'm looking at what we call the main effect of IV1 on the DV. Right? So I have two IVs, IV1 and IV2. In my example, I had, took the drug, didn't take the drug, and I had gotten therapy, didn't get therapy. Right? And so these are two independent variables on some continuous dependent variable. And so I want to look at the main effect. Right? Did IV1 predict levels of the DV? That's the main effect of IV1. I also am considering the main effect of IV2, right? Where I am considering, did the level of IV2 have some impact on the DV, right? And so these are two main effects. And look, if all I was interested in is the main effects, I could just do two one-way ANOVAs, right? I could do a one-way ANOVA for the first IV on the DV, and then I could do another one-way ANOVA on the second IV on the DV. But I can do even more with a factorial ANOVA. I can see not just the independent main effects, but I also can look at the interactive effect, or how these two things work in combination with each other. This is the magic, this is the power of a factorial ANOVA, is I can look at and consider the interaction, where I see that these two things combine in weird ways to affect the DV that I can't necessarily get just from looking at their independent effects on the DV all by themselves. So I'm particularly interested here in the moderator, or the interaction effect. We call this a moderation effect. So let's look at what this looks like. Right, so let's look at the case where, so I'm doing kind of a scatter plot here, right? And along my x-axis is one of my IVs, right? And so I have, high or low, or maybe I have, since I keep using the same example, right? Took the drug, no drug, right? And on the y-axis, right, I have level of social anxiety, right? And I have some continuous variable over here, right? And what I might find is an effect like this. I may have some main effect where if I took the drug, if I didn't take the drug, right, I have high social anxiety, but if I took the drug, I have low social anxiety, right? And so we see this kind of negative slope. And maybe that is the average effect, and that's really interesting. Right? But that's not always how things are going to happen, right? What if the average effect is nil, right? What if it doesn't seem to matter? Whether I took the drug or didn't take the drug, on average, doesn't seem to matter. I have kind of the same level of social anxiety either way. Well, that's interesting. Well, what if I actually have different lines, and this is an overall effect, but in fact I have different lines depending on my other IV, which isn't even on here yet. So remember, my other IV was whether or not you took the therapy. So in this case, let's look at the case where, I'm getting therapy, right? So I'm getting therapy, which means that if I'm not taking the drug and I'm getting therapy, right? So I would presume that I get whatever I get from taking the therapy. But then if I have the therapy and take the drug, right, then my social anxiety goes down. But I can draw another line that says if I'm not getting therapy, no therapy, no drug, didn't seem to make a difference. But now I have a case where I'm not getting therapy and I take the drug, and it actually causes my social anxiety to go up. I have no idea how this would actually happen, right? Again, not a clinical psychologist. But now we have two different lines, right? So this line represents therapy, kind of what we would expect. And this line represents no therapy, right? And what we see here is that when we are in therapy, the drug has the effect of reducing our social anxiety. When we are not in therapy, the effect is that when I take the drug, when I'm not in therapy, it actually increases my social anxiety. And then on average, what I would see, right, same number of people in each cell, what I would see on average is what appeared to be no main effect from the drug. What this is an illustration of is the interaction. It turns out that in this case, and again, I'm making it up, but in this case, whether or not the drug helps with social anxiety depends on whether or not I'm in therapy. I actually have a different slope. I have a different line. I have a different outcome depending on whether or not I'm in therapy. So when the impact of one of my IVs on my DV changes depending on a second IV, this is what's called an interaction effect or moderation. Right? So an interaction effect is when the impact of one IV on the DV is dependent on the level of another IV. This is an interaction. I cannot do this with one-way ANOVA. I could do one-way ANOVAs on therapy, and I could do one-way ANOVAs on drugs, and I would find out interesting information, but ultimately, unless I look at these together in a factorial ANOVA, I will know nothing about the interaction of drugs and therapy, where it turns out that the impact of drugs on my social anxiety depends on whether or not I'm in therapy. And again, one last caveat, I am not a clinical psychologist and I totally made this up, so I have no idea how drugs and therapy interact to affect social anxiety. But that is the power of factorial ANOVA and why we do it. And what I really want you to get out of this is that there are three effects that I need to consider. Right, so again, let me go back to, in my factorial design, I have IV1 and IV2, and I'm interested in three effects when I have two IVs. One is the main effect of IV1. The next is the main effect of IV2. And the third one is the interaction effect. So I have 1, 2, 3 effects that I am considering. These are the influence on my dependent variable. I'm looking at the main effect of IV1, the main effect of IV2, and the interactive effect of how these two things depend on each other and combine in order to affect the DV.